Good morning, everybody. Welcome back to cilinixfxcapital. Hope you're all doing great, and welcome back to this new video on this Saturday morning. Hope you're all having a great start of this weekend, of course. Hope you also got through last week relatively healthy or relatively safe. Obviously, it was a very volatile week. In our signal group, we actually did quite well. I mean, we had some shorts hit; those obviously worked quite well. But we also had some decent longs actually still, because crypto. Even though the situation was quite panicky, especially if you take a look at the stock market, which we will get to in a moment, of course. But even though the situation was quite panicky, I mean, Bitcoin has held its own relatively well, which is great to see, and we'll talk about that a little bit later, because that is one of the most interesting and one of the most important things to talk about, I think. But in general, a lot to talk about. We're going to do a full update here regarding the fundamentals, regarding the technicals as well. And then in the end, I hope you'll be prepared for next week, because ultimately right now, I'd say the volume is probably still quite high. Yeah, the volume is at like $42 billion here. So that's still quite good, but that was mostly because a lot of volume came in yesterday after the stock market close. And just in general, there was a lot of volume into the markets, right? And the volume is already dropping down. I expect that to continue. I think the volume tomorrow is like down 60%. So usually you do see some stability in that period of time. But all right, let's get right into it. So there's two main things fundamentally that I think we need to talk about. First thing, tariffs, all right? And the trade war situation. I talked about this briefly yesterday in my middle of the day market update. At this point of time, it just very much, look, the markets absolutely do not like what's happening, all right? And I have to say, I actually bought some stocks yesterday at like 520, because the stock market right now is down about 17%. If you go back in time, almost every time we did something like that, it was a good moment to buy. Now, I'm not telling you that you should buy the S&P 500 or should buy stocks right now, but I personally do think it's a bit of an overreaction. Excuse me. And right now, look, the main thing we have to wait for is two things, and those are things I cannot really predict, but it's either escalations or de-escalations in this trade war of the US with the world, which, I'm calling it a trade war because the media calls it a trade war. I don't actually see it necessarily as a trade war. It's just a change in stance regarding free trade and protectionism of the US, and that is what the US voted for. But that is what it is, but we just have to see, especially between the US and the EU and the US and China, which are the biggest export partners. What will happen? Will we see escalation? Yes or no? If the escalation increases, we'll probably drop down lower. Volatility index is also absolutely huge right now. So that is something we'll see next week. So far, like I said, the stock market is down a lot, but we have some massive gaps to the upsides. I think it's a matter of time before we actually fill those gaps and that we actually see some upsides, whether it's next week or in a month. That's what we still have to see. And then outside of that, what's going to be very interesting as well, and trust me, we'll talk about the technicals as well, but we need to talk about this first, is the fact that Bitcoin has held up incredibly well compared to the stock market. All right, so someone was buying Bitcoin last week, or some entities were not selling anymore, and I think it's going to be very interesting what that means. I mean, for example, if Michael Saylor just bought a huge amount of Bitcoin here, I think that's going to be bearish, and we'll see some bearish price action. If Saylor almost did not buy any Bitcoin, he certainly bought something, but if he bought a relatively small clip, I think that's extremely bullish, because that means that entities are buying Bitcoin here, whereas they're not buying the stocks or equities. All right, so that could be incredibly bullish for next week. But those are things we have to see for next week. For now, purely technically, Bitcoin is still in that level between 84,700 and 81,000. I would say, due to the uncertainty, it's best to assume that we are going to drop down lower into the bottom of the range. But given the strength we've seen, I do not expect us to drop down below that. All right, and ultimately, the further development of the price of Bitcoin, and we'll talk about this obviously tomorrow more as well, just depends on the fundamentals. So that is the main thing I will focus on, and I will also try to communicate to you as soon as I can. For now, I'd expect this. It's not the worst case scenario, but it is a bearish case scenario, because if we have some sort of a good stock market opening next week, Bitcoin can also easily do something like this. But more about that next week. All right. For now, that's it. Enjoy your weekends. Enjoy your Saturday. Join the Telegram and the Discord groups for more info. For now, thank you for watching. Take care and bye.